I'll introduce the people you see up here. On my geographic right is from Ward 3, Councilor Marilyn Richards. On my left is Councilor from Ward 6, Marianne Labarge. We have the Clerk of the Council, Lynn Nettleman, and we have the City Solicitor, Janet Shepard. And I'm Michael Bardsley, Councilor at Large and Council President. The first item on the up for discussion is an ordinance to create a community preservation committee. And it passed the first reading of the council, and on 8/17, it was a discussion at the ordinance at 9/12. There was at the ordinance at the city council meeting, some questions were raised, and then there was a suggestion of referring it back to the ordinance committee for further discussion. I don't think we're taking a vote on it this evening, but there were some points raised, and I know there are people in the audience this evening here concerned with the creation of a community preservation committee. The practice at the ordinance committee is to hear from people. We ask you to keep your remarks concise, but we do not have, at this point in time, a set limit of time. And we also allow some give and take. It's not as formal as the other, some of the other settings, and we find that more productive in terms of hearing from people and getting information and answering questions. So, having said that, I will ask, is there anybody in the audience who wish to make any remarks regarding Ordinance 2-710 through 2-716? Dara, if you could identify yourself, probably because we are being televised.
Darryl LaFleur, 244 South Street. I didn't bring the ordinance with me, so I'm going on memory. I believe in the language it is stated that members of the committee would all be special municipal. I was wondering what the rationale is for that. Oh, thank you. I believe, I'm not quoting the mayor, but I thought I either heard at a city council meeting that there was a lot of interest shown people serving on this committee. A lot of people have asked, inquired about it. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the special municipal employee, what that means. I'm sure the city solicitor could help us out with that. The only rationale I've heard about that is that using the special municipal employee status makes it easier to fill positions on committees because there's not that many people that want to serve. And I'm curious as to, I believe all the committees in Northampton now have this, the members of all committees have this status now, special municipal employee. And I'm concerned because, again, I'm not an attorney, but I believe that it weakens the conflict of interest laws. And the second thing is, I believe as it's written now, the ordinance would elect 2 members and 2 would be appointed, one by the mayor and one by the city council. And in the last city council meeting, Councilor Bardsley mentioned that it's possible to appoint 2. The 2 that were going to be elected are going to be not filled. Those seats are not going to be filled. And Councilor Bardsley suggested something that in the future, the other 2 seats that would be appointed initially could possibly be elected, so that we ended up with 4 being elected. ultimately. Now, I understand the importance of that. I understand getting the committee up and running. We can't wait for a municipal election. But I was wondering if a decision could be made now and codified that these two that are appointed initially would serve a one-year term until the municipal election, and that those two appointments would then not be allowed to run the first municipal election, because I feel that appointing two people to seats that would ultimately be elected seats gives those two people a significant advantage, the advantage of incumbency. I've had this in a guest editorial, and I'm speaking here because I was on the front lines of the CPA community debate. I was with a couple other members here. I was on the committee that helped collect signatures to put this on the ballot, and I spoke a great deal with opponents of this measure. And one of the appeasements that I spoke of personally, I had no authority to guarantee anything, was that I would do the best that I could to ensure that we had 4 elected seats on this committee. So that's why I'm here tonight, and those were the 2 main points that I wanted to raise. Thank you. And I'll leave this up here for anyone else.
I'm going to ask the city solicitor if she could explain the status of the special. Right now, I can't.
Special municipal employees are a special status that does help with, that does, if, you know, Daryl says it weakens the conflict of interest rules. It means that they don't apply in certain situations. So it does make it easier to find people who might have a conflict. For instance, if you were a city employee, you couldn't serve on this committee without that status, without the special employee status. There are other people that might not be able to be on those committees because of the kind of work that they do in the community. And so it gives you a special status that says that the conflict of interest doesn't apply, and so you can be either appointed or elected. As far as the, you didn't ask me this, but I think it's important about the elected officials and limiting the people who are appointed and saying that they can't run. I haven't looked at the laws, but my guess is that it's a free speech issue, that you cannot prohibit somebody from running for elected office. You can put term limits on it, but you can't say, you know, you can't run for this position. So if you wanted to put term limits on, you could suggest that. But
could you create a term limit simply for the first year of these 2 appointments?
No, I don't think you can. I mean,
term limit that applies.
I really think that if someone wants to run, that we can't stop someone from running just because they've been on the committee for 1 year. As I said, you can say, you know, the limit is 3 terms if you don't want people to be on more than 3 terms. But
you understand the point I'm making about if someone's appointed? I do. Is there anything in the law that you know of that would allow the city to address that issue?
I can look at the law to see if there's a special exception. But if there is not anything in the law itself, then the election laws would control, and you would not be able to limit who can run.
There has been discussion here and elsewhere at EdBlue, I'm sure, and in other places in the city around the way to configure the committee and to have those that are designated, what process is used to get on the committee, whether or not they're directly appointed by the committee they represent, or if they goes through for a mayoral approval. And there were 2 or 3 or even more ways of looking at it. And every time somebody, you know, a decision was made on one piece of it, then that changed how people were looking at the other piece. And what was brought before the council seemed to be the configuration that had the fewer dissenting comments to to it. And I don't think anybody's saying that's the only way to do it, or not even necessarily the best, but it was a way that addressed a lot of the concerns. And since this is something that we're new at putting together, and it looks different than a lot of the other committees, I think the thought was, give it our best shot at this time, and we can always go back and revisit it at some point later on. And so I think that's the spirit that people are looking at it. And right now, there's sort of, it's configured through several different ways: a mayoral appointment, a council appointment, an election, and then representatives from the 5 different constituency groups. You could every time we tried to tinker with one piece of it, it really had a impact on how people saw the other ones too. So it looked like right now it's a balancing act that's working for most people. Councilor Richards.
I had a question on the special city employee. By the very nature of the makeup of the committee, which has city employees on it, does that make everybody have to be a special city employee then?
It certainly would help. I mean, they do have to be special city employees, so you could vote the particular positions. You could vote, A1 has to be a special city employee, but it just makes sense to do the whole committee.
And does it offer them any other advantages or disadvantages?
It doesn't offer any advantages or disadvantages to them themselves, except that they won't be considered in conflict, and therefore they could vote on more of the items that come in front of the committee. So it would really free them to vote for those.
Would there be any items that they couldn't? You said more. They can vote on all of the items.
Well, I would have to look at the statute, as I said. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But there may be some items, for instance, if it were, a grant that was specifically going to their salary, I think that would still be a conflict.
Okay.
I was just
thank you.
that. Grants and so forth. So
Unless there's an exception in the statute, which I would guess that there is probably not, because they're becoming stricter with these. But, for instance, the rules might not apply if a grant was going to a department where that person had a relative.
Okay.
So it really frees up these.
So it helps the committee function.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you don't have questions all the time of, do I have a conflict? Do you have a conflict?
Yeah.
How many people can vote? And what's a majority? And all of the issues that are hard when you have people step back.
Who, Janet, puts this group in place? Is it the state that says, well, this is how we should set up?
The Community Preservation Act is...
You have to have somebody on conservation, somebody on planning?
Yes. They set out some of the guidelines, and then we have some flexibility on some of the positions. But certain positions we need to have on here.
Is there anybody else in the audience who hasn't spoken yet? George, if you would identify yourself.
Good evening, councilors. George Cohouse, 37 Evergreen Road. And I also worked for the passage of the CPA this past year with a couple other members of the audience. And I was here at the first discussion at the Ordinance Committee earlier this summer. And it was a great discussion. There was some good give and take, and I fully supported the draft ordinance that went on to the council. So at this point, it would be interesting to hear what those questions were that were raised by the other councilors. So if there's any kind of feedback or input we could help provide at this point, it might be very helpful. Other than that, I'm just really looking forward to the ordinance going through to the second hearing and being passed pretty much as is. And as the chair said, I think we can always revisit the committee and make some changes to the bylaws perhaps or the ordinance.
George, as one of the people who have worked on the passage of this, and you can live with the current proposal.
Yeah, yeah, I can live with it. And as Daryl said, none of us speak entirely for the committee, but I personally can live with
That's why I
make
phrased it that
composition
you
as it is.
individually.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Fran?
Fran Vogelman, 40 Arlington Street. I hadn't really intended to speak, but this was an opening. I think that what you've got here is very carefully crafted. It's very hard to do this in a way that pleases everybody, and I think you've come about as close as you possibly can. I think the job of the Ordinance Committee has been very well executed, and I hope we pass this thing. I, too, was one of those people that worked on it.
Okay. Thank you, Fran. Chris?
Chris Kennedy, 4 Bratton Court. Not to be redundant, but I guess I'm going to join the chorus that one that was involved from the beginning. For the CPA passage, I think it's not easy, but as Fran said, it was crafted with care. There are, as Mary Ann asked, there are a lot of things that are fixed in the law that are stipulated, but within the areas that we had for flexibility, I think it's a good compromise that tried to take all factors inside with Rudum, that was strongly opposed to it, as well as those that were proponents for it. And I think it's a good blend the way it stands now, and I would urge passage when it goes to its final vote for the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any other comments? I'm looking at Councilor Nakowitz. I don't know if he wanted to. Okay, yes, you're listening. Thank you.
Flag.
Okay. Okay, seeing none, and there's no, we had no vote to take on this because we had moved it forward, but there were some comments made, so we were just given the opportunity. I think the main concern was the timing, and some folks thought it had moved forward during the summer when a lot of people were not available for comments. And so we said, well, before the next meeting, there's going to be another Ordinance Committee meeting, so we can bring it back and give it another opportunity to be aired. I think that was the main reason for having it on the agenda this evening.
Thank you for doing that.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. Okay, so we will now move on, almost on time, in our time approximations, to the next items, and I think we're taking 2 of them. There's a zoning ordinance amendment, section 7.2 and 11.6, general sign regulations and approval criteria, and referred from the City Council on 8/17 to the Planning Board and the Economic Development, Housing and Land Use Committee. And there's a joint planning and ordinance public hearing scheduled for 9/28, which is in a week from Thursday, 2 weeks from Thursday.
yeah.
2 weeks from Thursday. So we're not going to take a vote on this tonight, but we wanted to give the opportunity for the public, again, to weigh in on this. And in conjunction with that, since they're part of a small package, is zoning ordinance amendment section 2.1, 5.2, and 10.13, definitions, general table of use, regulations and special permits. And it was referred from the, again, on the City Council on 8/17 to the Planning Board and the Economic Development, Housing and Land Use Committee. And there's a joint planning and ordinance public hearing scheduled for 9/28. And these 2 are ordinances in regard to the issue called the porno shop, quite frankly. And they came as a result of some activity that happened during the summer, and the proposed ordinances are an attempt to give the city some further control over such establishments, and regulating signage, and also controlling activities in there that are above and beyond the scope of a typical bookstore, specifically private viewing booths. So that is the intent of these two items, and we right now will give the public the opportunity to make comments and ask questions. If you could identify yourself, and then feel free to make your comments. And if you use your podium, please.
Thanks. My name's Adam Cohen. I'm here with my wife from Northport, Northampton. We live at 134 North Street. And we're very happy to see Ordinance Committee starting to take action on this so quickly. Certainly we support ordinances with regard to signage of adult businesses and the location of, if I understand correctly, perhaps the ordinance has changed that with respect to the location of adult businesses, what's being proposed is to, currently Northampton already has regulation of live nude dancing, and you're proposing to add, if an establishment has viewing booths, that will also come under location restrictions. So certainly we would support that. We would also urge you to add adult theaters to that buffer zone, the 500-foot buffer zone around homes, schools, churches, related vulnerable areas. So I hope we can talk a little bit about that. We've also distributed to you, and happy to give to everybody else here, draft regulation for the health inspector, which would regulate operation of viewing booths wherever they might be in Northampton. Packet includes a lot of documentation about unsafe sexual activity, unsanitary conditions that occur with private viewing booths. And we feel would be very well advised for Northampton to be proactive about that, even if no one's proposing to actually put viewing booths in the town right now. I've been told by someone who has a lot of experience with these matters, it's often quite a lot better to implement these regulations when there isn't a live proposal on the table than to wait until it shows up, and then perhaps fairness issues come up, you know. So it's better to be proactive in this area than I think than to be passively waiting for it. Do you have any questions for us about this? Or?
Any questions?
I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead.
I just want to reiterate exactly what you just said, which is it's very important to do this before there's an issue on the table. And the reason that, I don't know if you're aware of the case law, but there was a case that came up in the city of Revere where the court found that, in fact, the statute was specifically aimed at this video corporation, and it was actually a case on attorney's fees, and the city was charged with the attorney's fees of the video store. And I believe it was like $900,000.
It's a large sum of money.
And that was actually the issue that was before the court as to whether the attorney's fees were appropriate. But the reason that it came up is exactly what you said about it being specifically directed at this, and it was also deemed to be vague. And so if we're going to make any changes to this, this has been very carefully drafted to comply with the law and to make sure that all of the First Amendment issues are addressed. So if there are going to be changes, I would just like to weigh in on some of those changes and make sure that we're not getting ourselves in trouble.
A question about process for changes. Once the current issue has been resolved one way or the other, is it appropriate then to make other changes before something else comes forward?
That would be a very good time to do.
So that's the timing that would be triggering a lot of the, okay.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that you're doing here these two are not really specifically addressing the Northampton porn shop issue, because that they took viewing booths off of the table.
Right.
Right.
And you always have the right to regulate signage, so long as it's content neutral. And I think that we're pretty clear that what's proposed is legal. As I said, if you're going to make changes, I would like to make sure that they're reviewed again by me before they go to the council.
That's why you're here, Council.
Well, I won't be at the planning board meeting where you're going to discuss it, so I just want to reserve that right to review it again.
Janet, when Adam had called me in regards to adding the health department and having the issue of the health inspector going into these porno shops, I directly told him to call Ernie and let Ernie know about what he was bringing forth, and he did call Ernie. And I know I had talked with Tony Patillo also, and he was going to talk with Ernie about this. And I agree that sometimes it's probably good to go ahead and put something in place that has not happened here in the city. But I try to explain also that because of Ernie being the department head, he needed the responsibility of looking of what you were bringing forth to us and looking at the language very carefully. And also, would his department actually be able to do what this is asking for?
It certainly would be, it's always been part of your process to send these things to the Board of Health. So I would assume that anything that was going to go forward would go to the person in charge and to the Board of Health. Maybe just to see if they think that this is something that they can enforce, or whether this should be somebody else to enforce it, or.
Okay.
But I agree with you that it should come from the department so that they know what it is that's being put forward.
Right. So would you suggest that we have Ernie at our next joint?
I don't think that you want to have him at your meeting. I think you want the Board of Health to decide what they want.
That's what I mean. Should he be at the meeting to tell us, or if not, do it in writing what he feels?
I wouldn't. I guess what I would do is I would say the appropriate way would be to refer to the Board of Health for their, for whatever they want, and if they want to bring forward an ordinance, or if they want to propose these regulations, that's really up to them. Because that's their jurisdiction, and that's actually statutory in the Massachusetts general laws. We don't. There are some things that we have control of in terms of the Board of Health, but a lot of it is regulated by state law.
Okay. So that would not be placed as an amendment coming in on this ordinance? No. Okay.
No, it can't be.
Okay. Also, and one more question, please. The theater part of it that I just heard. I think, Adam, you had suggested 500 feet.
I think that's the existing buffer zone around.
Well, that's what it is on this ordinance.
Yeah.
But why theaters? I don't understand that.
Well, a couple reasons. Adult theaters, there's a lot of studies and literature about the bad effects they have on their neighborhoods in terms of crime, economic decline, harassments of passersby. So it would be a very bad thing if an adult theater located, certainly on 135 King Street or any similar sensitive residential area. I think also, some people have objected that the notion of adult theaters, locating here is far-fetched. And I would counter that the adult industry has proven itself to be incredibly creative. They're at the forefront of a lot of new technologies, internet, DVDs, all that stuff. And so I think here's another area where Northampton would be well advised to be proactive and not wait for, someone to come up with something new that's basically an adult theater located in a sensitive neighborhood and cause a lot of problems. It would be much harder to deal with in a reactive way than here, where I think it would be fairly straightforward to deal with it here.
So, Janet,
I'm actually, Wayne walked in exactly at the right moment, because I'm not sure that we allow theaters in highway business on King Street. Do we? No, I'm putting you on the spot, but.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
I just don't think we do, but that's something we could check. But no, what he's suggesting is that we should put, that we should be restricting live theater. And I don't think that that's allowed in the King Street Highway Business District.
It wouldn't be live. This would be filmed adult theater.
I don't think that we allow theaters on that.
I think it's an as-of-right use. I think it's a special permit use. It's not an as-of-right use, but I think it's one of the permitted uses.
I mean, theater's
Well,
got to be allowed
obviously,
somewhere in Northampton.
none of us know, so that's something that we could check.
You write it. I mean, it might not be in highway business, but I mean, presumably a theater is
That's
permitted somewhere
one of
in
the points I
Northampton.
wanted to
So,
make.
Downtown,
Yeah.
Right.
I know it's
Yeah.
allowed downtown. And
so yeah, I think it would benefit us to have just that 500-foot buffer zone.
That's one of those issues that we've identified we should look at later on in the
Exactly.
process.
Yes.
It's not currently part of the wording. We can't add it right now, but we, okay. So focusing on
Wayne, I
the,
think, is going to go check and
Okay.
see where we are.
I'm going to,
Yeah, I just wanted to
Richard.
clarify, again, for people who are here, the public, and even myself, we're dealing with two proposed ordinances. One is the expansion of the definition, of adult entertainment to include,
viewing booth.
Viewing booths,
I'm sorry, viewing booths. And the other is to deal with signage.
correct.
Okay, so those are the only two things that we're considering tonight.
That's right.
Okay.
And it's my recommendation that we not change anything, that if you want to consider things in the future, that we do a new ordinance.
Right. So we're not dealing with Board of Health or anything like that
Correct.
tonight. We're dealing with
Well, you can't-
expansion of the
it's
definition.
not on your
and
agenda,
signage,
so.
yeah. I just
and we
wanted.
don't have it- and we don't have an
I just wanted to
ordinance.
make that point because it tends to get confusing for folks.
And after considerable study of the issue, I mean, this is a deliberate strategy in order to avoid a situation comparable to what you mentioned.
Exactly. And that was when Wayne was involved in drafting this, and I reviewed it, and we specifically geared it towards the criminal statutes that are already in effect, so that we get so that we don't have First Amendment issues, so that it's clear that we're talking about definitions that are statutory and easy to look at.
Any other comments, Adam?
I actually need to leave, but Jenny will be here if you have questions for No Porn.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you may. And again, for the audience, to identify yourself.
I'm Jen D. Ryder of 134 North Street and No Porn, Northampton. And I talked to the attorney from Revere, and my understanding from him was that the big problem they had was that they had drawn the zone, the prohibited zone, so broadly that there was no really realistic zone for any adult business to open anywhere in the town, and that was sort of a deliberate strategy on their part, but one that's frowned on by the First Amendment. Whereas there are a lot of other towns in Massachusetts whose adult zoning law is more restrictive in terms of the types of businesses that are prohibited within that buffer zone. Adult bookstores, adult video stores, theaters, and peep shows. It's not simply peep shows, and that those have withstood First Amendment challenge. So I was just curious, first of all, what the committee's thinking was about why adult theaters were left out of the regulation that you've been considering. Why did you decide to only regulate peep shows rather than peep shows and all kinds of recorded displays?
Well, this is not sponsored by the committee, so I actually am going to ask the city
I didn't
solicitor.
draft it, I just reviewed it for, you could ask Wayne, but we have answered
Wayne's
the question about theaters, and they are an allowed use in highway business, so.
They are allowed.
They are an allowed use, yes.
Okay. Wayne, do you recall in drafting this why theaters were not included in adult uses?
Yeah.
Was there any discussion on that?
The short answer is just trying to find out what was the ordinance which a majority or supermajority of councilors could agree to. And it seemed like there was strong consensus that nobody wants a live entertainment, nudity, even if it's not alcohol involved. If you remember the ordinance 4 years ago, only regulated live nudity if there was alcohol provided. So it seemed like there's a pretty strong consensus in council to regulate things even if there's no alcohol. It seems like there's a strong consensus on council to regulate the peep shows, and it seems like there's a strong consensus to be concerned about what it looks like from the street in terms of signage and blacked out windows. And frankly, it just seemed like there's a bigger disagreement about any other issue, and so we were trying to go through where there was a clear consensus, first of all.
I don't know how you would determine that, because I don't know as an issue if people have even weighed in on it or thought about it. I know I haven't really thought about it because I haven't been asked about it in terms of the theaters. I think it would be helpful to, as was suggested, to anticipate some of the other things that could happen. And I don't think you need much of an imagination. I think you can just go online and see what's happened to some of the other communities. You know, I think it was Rye that had the first case with the bookstore, and then they had massage parlors in a theater. And so I think anything that we can do to anticipate that before they actually come is the way to go. And if it's presented, I mean, the best way to find out how the council is feeling is to propose it, and then I'm sure people will vote it up or down or amend it. And I think if the proposal is written to include more things, and then we can cut back and drop things if there is an agreement. But I do think it merits discussion, and I do think it's important to have it before something arrives, and then therefore it limits what we can do as the current situation. So what I would like to do is, after this one is dealt with, is to go back and maybe look at some other uses that are currently not being talked about, but that could come in and have an impact on the character of some of the neighborhoods.
Well, I think it's exactly the way to do it. I mean, if the Ordinance Committee wants a broader discussion, we're certainly happy to help. Our concern, quite frankly, is we'd like this ordinance to be passed by council before the first use comes in. And so we wanted something that we clearly knew we clearly assumed there wasn't a lot of council opposition, and we thought could go through quickly. And anything else seemed like it would be a longer discussion process. So that's why we separate them out. It's sort of your call in terms of what the next step is after this ordinance.
Okay. So I realize there's a lot on your plate, so to speak, but I think we would be interested in talking about other language to address other concerns that haven't arisen but could very well. And it's as Adam said earlier, is to be preventative, and I think that's a good strategy.
We can certainly draft that. I will say that I know from the city's staffing perspective, one of the concerns in the building commissioner's office is, how do you draw a line that doesn't require the building inspector to have to come in and count videos, for example? Because there are other stores in town that sell adult videos, other stores in town that sell adult bookstores, other stores that sell adult paraphernalia. And I think he was very concerned about not wanting to come in and say, okay, it's 5% or it's 10%, and so that's probably the biggest draftsman challenge for that piece.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Again, identify yourself for the public viewing.
I'm Karen Bercovici, and I live on Vernon Street. And I want to point out, I don't live right in that neighborhood, but I think this is an issue for everyone who lives in Northampton. And I'm here mostly to I haven't been following all of the very specific legal matters. I'm very interested to hear it. I think this ordinance should pass, but it's absolutely just the very beginning. It doesn't address the real issue that has made particularly women, and we've started a group called Feminist Action Mobilization that has started the demonstrations in front of 135 King Street, because we also feel that not only legal things have to be addressed, but the community has to stand up and speak out on this, and we look to you as our elected leaders to come up with some of the things I've heard, like this discussion right now. This is just the beginning. Let's look at other ways. We have no, I mean, people always say, well, what about Pride and Joy? What about places that sell little bits? They are not pornography stores. Now, I can't speak about Oh My because I really don't know much about it. Pride and Joy is a gay and lesbian store. They happen to have a section that sells some magazines that are pornographic, maybe. But I mean that are probably, though I can't say that I've looked there. I love the store and I support that. We're talking about a full pornography store, $56 billion business, pornography. And the ones that it hurts most are women and children. It is violence against women and children. We are a city that honors, respects, and places in leadership position women in a very unusual way, and that value our children. This store, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that has faced Northampton since the 11 or 12 years that I've lived here. We already have a downtown that is going the way of much of the United States. Dunkin' Donuts is just the latest of these big conglomerate, not independent, not people we know in our community. And this, if the pornography store opens in Northampton, will really change the character of the city. Now, I may not be saying things to you that you don't know or feel, but as a resident of New York, this is where, of Northampton, this is where I'm coming from in terms of my great anger and concern about this store opening. So I don't want caution. I want you to be courageous leaders. I haven't heard enough from the mayor, particularly. And if I want to hear you stand up and speak out, because it's not only legal, it's community and how we feel about it. I know when we've stood there 2 times. We're going to stand there the rest of September at least. People honk. I mean, the response has been really great. So I just want to urge you to keep looking. I don't know all of the legal ways of doing it. I'm interested to hear what Janet says, but I want you to know that probably, I would say, just my sense, that a great many people in this community are looking to you to find ways. We're going to do our part by standing out there, by doing whatever we can, by having educational shows. The Boston Globe is supposed to come there tomorrow to the demonstration, by getting the word out and educating our community. But we look to you to do what you can do legally and in every way. We know that Capitol Video goes around, they use their great wealth to threaten towns with legal proceedings, and they do it. But we have got to find ways, and I think we have wonderful elected officials who are creative and hopefully courageous enough to find ways, not let them scare us, because that's what they're trying to do. We cannot let this happen, because it is really going to change the character of Northampton. We also have Smith College. Young women and young children, male and female, and women in general, are the ones who are most threatened by this store. And this is not just the neighborhood. We're not talking about property values. We're talking about something much more important, and that's how we feel in our city. Do we feel safe walking down the street? Are we going to want to walk past King Street? Do we feel good about having a full pornography store? I don't care if they have viewing booths or whatever. Just the magazines alone are enough. If you really look at it, it's all over the internet. Why they want to open up a store, I don't know, because anybody can get it off the internet anyway. But this is really going to change life in Northampton and how particularly women, parents, feel about being in Northampton. So that doesn't help you legally, but it gives a feel, I think, for how a lot of people, particularly women and parents, I think, feel about this.
Thank you, Karen. Councilor.
Karen, I think, Wayne, when did we place our ordinance in on live entertainment? Well, about 5 years ago. Because, Karen, there was great concerns of 2 men that wanted to place off of Pleasant Street nude entertainment, which was live entertainment.
I remember, yeah.
Okay, it took a lengthy time of doing that language, and like our city solicitor would say, it's just not something you can just write.
No.
I mean, you need to look at, you know, freedom of expression. You need to be very careful with the language that's being put in place. You know, so the city was right on that.
Understand, yeah. Can I say something about free speech? And I have a question about this, because we have a flyer, and I don't know whether this is the same thing, but I want to read to you something, because as feminists, we have a very different take on whether the pornography is free speech and whether it should be protected, because we call it hate speech, and that what it does is threaten the civil rights of women and children. So we don't think it is a free speech issue. Now, you may be talking specifically about a store and, you know, renting to a store, but I just want to read this. We refute the legal fiction that pretends pornography is merely another form of speech, deserving of constitutional protection. Without new approaches which recognize pornography as a civil rights violation, its harm to individuals and women as a class remains unredressed. It's hate speech that causes harm by putting women and children's lives at risk and robbing them of their civil rights. So I really question, even some of progressive and left people say this is a free speech issue. Women who have been threatened by violence all of our lives and in many different ways and feel that pornography is that, do not feel this is an issue of free speech.
Thank you, Karen. Other questions? No?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wish to make comments at this time? Surely. Nope.
I just wanted to add that a lot of us in the community have invested a lot of time and money in bringing this issue to the attention of the public, and I think while it's still hot, we should try to get as much leverage as we can, as broad an ordinance as legally the committee feels we can pull off, because Capitol Video and stores like it, they look down on towns like ours, and they think they're going to catch us napping, and they don't believe that, you know, slow-moving little local governments can stand up to them. So I think while there's momentum, it's the best time, especially since the process does take so long. You know, and necessarily so, because we have to make sure all the legal T's are crossed and I's are dotted. But that's, to me, is a bigger argument for trying to get to regulate as broadly as we can, all in one shot. You know, I would also add that their business models thus far, this particular chain, has been to have these viewing booths, because they're not just interested in the retail of the videos and the magazines, because you can get stuff like that on the net. They want to create a meeting place for people to come in off the interstate highway and, you know, have sexual encounters in the viewing booths and so forth. And while taking the doors off the viewing booths and all those other things in the health regulation will certainly help that, I just have this nightmare scenario in my mind where they're going to do something that's not quite a viewing booth, but that still causes people to come and meet and linger in the store, and that would be more like an adult theater than it would be like a private viewing booth. But then we would have that gap in the law, and they'd say, well, it's not a viewing booth, it's not a one size, you know, one person little closet, it's a larger room, but it's still a room where stuff is going to be going on that we don't want to have going on. So, you know, I just think we need to look down the line and think of what's going to make sense for them as a business model. They're going to try and push the envelope. So, you know, I'm all in favor of being proactive on that. So thank you for your time.
Having spoken with each of my colleagues about this on various occasions, I think I'm safe to say that the three councilors here are committed to doing, to the full extent legally possible, passing ordinances to protect the city. We're taking our cues from the city solicitor, but we'll look at this and we'll be aggressive as possible in getting ordinance that will protect the citizens. Okay.
Question that I forgot. Somebody told me, and I don't know the history of it, that this came up before in the 70s. Was it the 70s that when there was a proposed pornography store similar? issue, and the community got together
way
and...
before my time.
and-
Yeah,
Do you
I have
know?
not heard that. That's the first time I've heard that.
I find more about
I'm not
it,
saying
I'll-
it's true or not true, but I have not heard that.
Okay.
So we would have to do some research on it. Okay, and as we said that these were discussion items this evening, there will be a formal hearing of the planning board and the ordinance committee on September 28th. And they tend to be more formal, and there isn't the give and take, and oftentimes there's a limited amount of time. But so we wanted to give people a different opportunity, a different forum. And staying on track, we will now go to the public discussion around the wetlands ordinance that has been resubmitted for discussion. And there's two ordinances related to that. One is amending Chapter 24 and 25 for the wetlands ordinance, and another is 25-5 for non-criminal disposition and the enforcing officer and penalties. We have a packet of information that we were given for the meeting, at least the council was, and I will ask if there is somebody who wants to come forward and explain the new proposed ordinance. And I don't know if somebody from the planning office is here. Okay.
I'll start.
Okay. I will make a comment that I'm slightly surprised that more people turned out for the wetlands than for pornography. I expected a lot. But I guess that's only in Northampton. Wetlands generate more of a crowd than pornography. So that's a good thing. Again, if you could identify yourself for the cameras, which I think may have been turned off, but in any event, identify yourself and...
There's your real answer,
yeah,
right? Okay, my name is Paul Wetzel, and I'm chair of the Northampton Conservation Commission. And what we're going to do, we have several Conservation Commission members here. I don't know, I'll invite them all to speak if they wish. I don't know if they all will. And then, of course, Bruce and Wayne will speak. And did you guys are you going to give them the information?
Yes, I'll get
But you'll give it to them, okay. All right, I just have some introductory remarks. Just as you go through this ordinance, I just wanted to point out that this isn't an ordinance that we just sort of came up with on the back of envelopes and things. In fact, it's been in the works for a long, long time, and it's been very controversial, not only in the community, but also on our own commission. And so, because the commission represents a diversity of interests, and so we have disagreements on the commission, which I actually don't find to be too difficult, although it may be confusing if you're looking at from the outside. But there was a couple years ago when Gloria McPherson was still working for the city, there was an interest in protecting buffer areas around wetlands. And so the planning department developed a policy, and that policy was given to every applicant who came in and wanted to, come before the Northampton Conservation Commission. And those policies, part of what these new ordinances reflect are a codification of those policies that have been in place for about 2 years. So that's one thing. And the other thing is there is greater protection given to vernal pools. And if you want, I will describe what a vernal pool is. If you would like, I can.
I know what it is. I know what it is.
You know what it is? Okay, so that's fine. All right. So there's greater protection given to vernal pools, in particular type of wetland. And it's hoped that these new these new regulations, this new ordinances will provide a better and a clearer notice. It'll just provide applicants a clearer picture of what they need to do and what the regulations are. So it's clarification, it's protection for vernal pools, and it is a codification of an existing policy. So we want to make that existing policy stronger so the city doesn't run into legal difficulties. So that's the major changes. That's the major impetus there. So we've had a lot of public input. Many of the public comments that have been told to us formerly have actually been incorporated into this. So it's been a working document for a while, and it's coming to you. So with that, I'll turn it over. Does anyone else on the commission want to say anything in particular, either about specifics or about the general process?
Get that?
If you do, just come up and introduce yourself.
Is there any way that we can comments?
Good evening. I'm Michael Vito. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission. And as Paul described, this was quite a process. When I joined the commission back just in February, this came before me. It went through many different lives before we came to what we're presenting tonight. And for myself and for all of us, in trying to really come up with something that we thought would be good for the community and really go along with Northampton's reputation and its willingness to strive for sustainability, I think we have a pretty good balance here. I think we have a document that will protect the outlying areas of the city where we have most of our vernal pools, precious open space, but we're not so strict in the infill areas of the city, where we'd like to see more development, where I think most people would like to see more development happen. So as you go through this process, I'm sure it will go longer than this evening. Keep that in mind, that that's what we were really, I think, for my part anyway, was really trying to accomplish. So.
Thank you, Michael. We can go to general public comment, or if there are other, or do you want to do, why don't you do the presentation?
Sure. So I have a packet for you. It's nothing new. It's the same packet that basically, it's everything together. It's the old ordinance, the new ordinance,
We have
the
that.
analysis.
Good.
Yeah, you have one.
Was
Is that the same thing that you just gave?
Conservation is killing more trees.
Yeah, really. Luckily, we have a lot of trees.
I have a color.
Okay. So my name is Bruce Young. I work as the land use planner. And basically, I was going to just kind of quickly run over in just a hair more detail what Paul said. You know, the new ordinance has been put together to reflect awareness of the sensitivity of vernal pools in the city. That's one major change. Another major change is to basically codify the existing policies to actually put them into the regulations. And that's extremely important, especially right now. There's a recent ruling, there's a Fieldstone Meadows ruling where a commission had lost a legal battle because their policies had not been codified into regulation. So that's why the timing now, that's why we're putting this forward. And that may be, in my eyes, that's the most important part of this. You know, these policies were adopted on October 23rd in 2003. We've been using them consistently since then, and we'd like to continue with them. We think they work well, both for protecting the environment in the city and allowing for growth, sustainable growth. And the last part, which is equally important, I guess, is that this ordinance provides a clearer, better and clearer notice to applicants who come before the city, before the Northampton Conservation Commission, so that it is easier for an applicant to know exactly how they can build sustainably, and how they can move forward with their projects. And so I guess quickly what I'd like to talk about is what's happening in this ordinance based on those three changes. And the first one is the vernal pools. And what we're doing in this is the vernal pools, we're increasing the protection of vernal pools in the outlying areas of the city as identified in the ordinance. Outside of the business and industrial areas, we're increasing it by 100% from 100 feet to 200 feet. And this does sound like a huge increase of protection, and it could cause a ruckus. And we've evaluated this, we've done an analysis on it, and it really only affects about 107 acres in the city, which is a pretty small amount with a city of 24,000 acres or more, plus or minus, I guess. So that's the first big change. And the vernal pool areas within the infill or downtown commercial business districts, there's no change for that, no regulatory change. With the exception of before we had an ordinance that said it had to be a certified vernal pool. At this time it says it could be a potential vernal pool or a certified vernal pool. But there are very few vernal pools that are existing or what we know as potential vernal pools in the business districts, the industrial districts, or the urban residential B or C, the kind of dense urban areas. So we only know of, there's only one that's certified, and we know of one other potential. And then there's one on a border, but it doesn't, we won't count that. The second part is, let me get my paper here, is codifying the existing Conservation Commission policies. And that policy right now is a 50-foot no disturb area in the outlying areas. And generally what we've been doing is 35 feet in the urban areas and 10 feet in the industrial areas. So in the business park, we have some, pretty much all the businesses in the industrial park are right up to the wetlands. Areas in downtown or around downtowns, we've allowed up to 35 feet, but sometimes closer. Using the senior center as an example, we allowed them to go within 8 feet. They planted a small buffer. And that's what our new ordinance does. It allows them to go 10 feet in the industrial areas, business areas, and then in the urban residential B and C areas, we allow them to people to go up to 35 feet, but with extraordinary measures, we allow them to go up to 10 feet. So, and we're continuing to use our 50-foot area in the outlying areas, in the urban residential A and rural residential, suburban residential areas. And we've been doing that for 3 years. Some projects we actually allow to go closer. Some projects we keep it a little further away. And the commission will continue to have that discretion, but there'll still be a 50-foot no disturb for applicants so they know what to expect when they come in front of us. The difference between our regulations and some of the neighboring cities that have adopted wetlands bylaws is they have, several of these cities around here, cities and towns in Western Mass have no disturb areas, and that's where they draw the line. And they don't allow anyone closer. And what we do is we look at it as a project by project basis, and we do allow people to go closer with measures of mitigation or replication and sometimes open space preservation. We think that's a big difference between these ordinances that have a direct cutoff, a line in the sand, and what we've been doing for the past few years. And the last thing is to allow applicants to come in front of us and know exactly what to expect. That's been a criticism that we've had for a couple of years now, is every project is different. Applicants don't know what to expect, so sometimes it may push them away from applying in Northampton, or it has created some strife within. So those are the three major changes. And I guess Wayne's going to talk quickly about the analysis, or an analysis we did about the impacts of these changes, and what we think the changes will be for the vernal pools and codifying our wetlands policies.
Thank you, Bruce.
I'll try to be brief. In the package Bruce passed out, there's a copy of the page that says analysis of impacts. That's what I'm going to talk off of. I just want to start with highlighting 2 points that Bruce made that are really important. The first one, he talked about that some communities use sort of a rigid do not disturb line, and Northampton Conservation Commission's looked at sort of looking what the project is. Where it's particularly important is there are some things where there's not a lot of flexibility about where it goes. So if you're putting a gas pipeline in, or a water line, or a sewer line, or a driveway, there may only be one place where it can go. There's a road here, and the open, the developable land's back and back. That's the area the commission's worked with developers. That's reflected in here in terms of saying you have to cross here. That's where there's flexibility. Where there's not much flexibility is the actual building envelope itself, where if you have a 2-acre lot, yes, the driveway may have to go by a wetlands, may have to be in a buffer zone close to wetlands, but the house and the immediate yard near the house should be away from the wetlands. Because typically what we're talking about in the outlying area is larger lots where there's usually some flexibility about where the lot gets laid out. The other point he raised, which is the main thing I'm going to talk about, is when Bruce talked about the Conservation Commission policy, Commission's been under pressure in 2 directions. On the one hand, the regulated community wants to know what the rules are. They don't like the idea of going before the Commission and knowing there's a 100-foot buffer and maybe they're going to be permitted and maybe they're not going to be permitted. On the other hand, it's City Council, not the Conservation Commission, who sets policy. So the Conservation Commission had this sort of policy, and the main goal from staff standpoint at least, was to tell applicants, this is what the Commission's always done in the past. No guarantee what it's going to do for your project, but it's what's always done in the past, and it hopefully gives you some guidance. The case that Bruce talked about is a case where a town, actually Andover, actually relied, there's a similar circumstance, but they actually relied on the policy. They told someone, no, we're turning you down. We're not going to look at your application. We're turning you down because you don't have the policy, and Andover lost that. But we're in a much better position to have the guidelines in the regulations in what you write than what the Commission does. And so when I come to this analysis, you see in many cases, we don't believe there's going to be a change in regulatory impact between what's currently being done and what's proposed. But what there is we're changing it from sort of the practice of the Conservation Commission to an analysis of what the ordinance actually does. So let me just walk you through this quickly. On the first page is the analysis of vernal pools. Bruce has already basically gone over that number. This is the main area where the regulations are getting stricter, and approximately 107 acres of land that's currently not regulated would be regulated, scattered throughout the city. In the business districts, as Bruce pointed out, we know where most of the vernal pools are. We don't think there's a lot of new ones, and so we don't believe there's any significant regulatory change. The business park, for example, has 3 vernal pools which have just been certified. So we already know where they are, and so again, from a regulatory standpoint, there's not a big change. In the outlying area, you see the number there, we are increasing the regulated area. When you look at the numbers, I'm not going to go through all the numbers and bore you. When you look at the numbers, the important ones are the ones excluding vernal pools on conservation land. So this document's called Wetlands Ordinance Proposed Amendments Analysis of Impacts. So we did the analysis of all the wetlands and all the vernal pools in the city, but for looking at it, we ran the numbers, where are they throughout the city, and then where are they excluding conservation land? Because frankly, if there's a vernal pool in a conservation land, it doesn't affect anybody from a regulated standpoint. So the first page is the vernal pool piece. The second page is the analysis of all the wetlands in the city outside of vernal pools. And you notice for the most part, there's no difference because, as Bruce said, for the most part, the ordinance as proposed follows the policy that's on the books. So for riverfront area, there's absolutely no area because the ordinance doesn't change from what the state law has been for a number of years. For the outlying areas, there's no change because that's, again, the policy the Conservation Commission has had. The only real change is a further, what Mike Vito was saying, a further reduction in the most urban areas, so that in the industrial park, for example, the commission's already allowed people to build right up to the wetlands. But in the highway business, they've applied a certain setback, roughly 35 feet. So this codifies that, no, that 10 feet they've been using in industrial districts is going to apply in all business districts. So there is a minor regulatory decrease in those most urban business areas. I can answer questions, but otherwise I wasn't planning to go through all the numbers.
Questions? Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. What? Oh, okay. Members of the public who wish to make comments. Are you on a timeline? Did you, Susan? Are you on it?
You're city person. Go first.
Okay.
Get all the city people out.
Get us out of the way. My name's Terry Anderson, Economic Development Coordinator in the Mayor's Office. And I think the last time we gathered here to talk about the wetlands ordinance, I had some concerns about the regulations as proposed for the business districts. And I'm happy to report that I no longer have those concerns, that this revised version addresses those issues. And I want to thank the Conservation Commission and the planning staff for listening and being responsive to those concerns of the business community. I appreciate that very much. Just in a brief summary, the three major areas that I was concerned about were the performance standards for the business zones, which now the new performance standards will not apply to the business zones, and in fact actually reduces some of the setback requirements from wetland boundaries in the business zones, which allows for business development to occur in areas that the city has relatively little commercial industrial land left. So that's very positive. Secondly, in the business park, the compromise agreement was that the current standards would continue to apply there, and I'm comfortable with that as it's written. And then thirdly, my final concern was that there is an industrial zone in the Water Supply Protection District that would have been negatively affected also, and that zone is now going to be treated the same as the other industrial zones. And I'm also comfortable that the regulations as written, along with the state law, will protect the water supply under these regulations. So I'm happy with it, and I'm happy to answer questions as well, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Come forward and state your name for the viewing audience and the record, please.
Susan DiMaria. I am a resident of Northampton, 147 Riverside Drive, Bay State Village. I'm here. I wanted to see, I understand that this is coming to a vote tonight, and I think that this ordinance is very complicated, that it really needs careful evaluation and scrutiny. I was just, the new ordinance was on the web, I guess, a couple of weeks now, and I know a number of people who are very interested and could not be here tonight who'd like to read this and look at it again. And given its complications and how, I don't know about you all, we didn't get the paper trees that you have, but I wouldn't mind having one to see what it is. But ours, the ordinance that's on the web is all sort of marked up and stuff, so it's a little difficult to read. And I didn't get the rest of the packet. Thank you. But I guess I'm coming up here to ask if you wouldn't mind continuing the published discussion part of it to the next meeting and the vote, to give us some time to be able to look at this. I do know of at least 2 people with expertise that would like to have been here, but weren't able to be here and have not had time to read this and had not had a chance to look at it. So that is my first request, if that's possible. I don't know the format for getting that in the discussion, but
you made the request, and so when we start discussing it, we'll certainly take that into consideration. Personally, I feel like we've got a lot to digest, and so,
Well, yeah, I mean, we haven't even seen this part of it, so, because I do have other comments, but I feel like
Okay,
they'd be
continue.
premature if it's going to be continued. I'd rather have a chance to really look it over. I have read this. It was not easy to read. I am a lawyer, and I have read this, and it was not easy to read. I didn't have a lot of time to spend on it, and I would like to come back with detail, but I also know other people. But some of the things, the general things that I had about this was, number one, I think it's very broadly written. And I have concerns about how it's written and trying to understand it. So, I mean, you know, again, I think that, you know, more time, I feel like I didn't have enough time. I'm sure if you've just gotten this package tonight, you haven't had enough time to look at this. So I think that that has to be looked at. I think that the other thing that we should really look at is what the other communities in the area are doing. Because I think, from my understanding, again, it's, you know, I'm just coming in on this now, that we are being much broader in terms of allowing much more building on wetlands areas than the other communities like East Hampton and Amherst and surrounding. And I'd like to know exactly what that is. And I do know that there are people out there that have looked at this that are not here tonight. So I think that should be looked at. So those are the two things, is really looking at the language here and then looking at how we fit in. What are we really doing to the environment in Northampton when you're going to pass this ordinance? So that's it.
Okay.
And in the alternative, if it cannot be continued tonight, is there a way to get written stuff?
If we do take a vote on it tonight to move it forward, it would go on the agenda of the city council, and you could certainly have written statements that would be in the packet for councilors.
Okay.
I cannot speak for the council, but I personally right now, I'm not ready to vote on this evening. So I think there's a good chance that we would continue this. And did Ed Lou vote on this?
No.
Are they going to continue it, or they didn't have a recommendation?
We wanted to wait for some public comment.
So like the other committee that has reviewed this apparently didn't vote on it either. So I think this process will have some more time to it.
Okay. And that would that also include public comments or way to get public comments?
I think it's safe to say it'll be back on our agenda at the next meeting.
With public.
And we'll have more comments like this and a chance for more discussion.
When are your meetings on regular days?
It is on the second Tuesday at 6 o'clock. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I have a question for someone from the committee. I realize you discussed this, and it looks like a lot of work, went a lot of hands-on work. But did you have public hearings? Were there a lot of members of the public that turned? Okay. And on the final product, were there pros and cons, or were on the committee itself, was it a unanimous vote?
Well, we were missing a member, and I haven't heard his comments on it yet.
Okay, but those present and voting were in support?
Yeah.
Okay, just...
When was the last public hearing?
We had a public hearing in April, and that public hearing was for comments, and we left it open until May for written comments. And then almost every Conservation Commission hearing from May till this point, we put it on the agenda and had discussions during Conservation Commission hearings.
Michael.
So it would be through the summer once a month, and then twice a month before that.
Council.
It's on at least 20 different agendas. We have discussion on wetlands ordinance. We left it open to public comments and/or written comments.
And just to explain, too, that those written comments also came via email that we responded to, too. And if there were questions, we asked those people to come in to further elaborate where there was some confusion or whatever in terms of that. There was a lot of input, essentially.
Councilor?
Yeah, I was just wondering, Bruce, because I know it was mentioned at the meeting the other morning on economic housing and development, on the comments that you received, and I know one of the councilors had asked if you did have those comments, and I'm asking. I asked Lynn today if she could possibly get them. I would like to read what the comments were and the concerns of what people had with this ordinance, and that's going to help me. We do have a meeting coming up, a joint meeting, I think, September 28th. I'd like to see these comments from the public. The way I feel right now, I don't want to rush this. I mean, during the summertime is a bad time for hearings. People are on vacation. I also feel I need a little bit more time of looking at this ordinance, but I also would like to have the public know that this is a board. And they don't know this. Maybe it might be on the internet, but there's a lot of people on my ward who do own property and don't have a computer, and nothing's been in the paper about the wetlands ordinance coming aboard tonight. So I think, to be in due respect and fair of the public, we need to have some kind of announcement that this ordinance is coming in on an open public hearing.
Sure, okay. I can get those comments to the members of the committee and the other city councilors as well.
Thank you, Bruce.
Sure.
Other comments from the public? Alex.
Alex Giesland, 164 Riverside Drive. Coming with some trepidation. I'm well aware of Councilor Bardsley's admonition to ex-councilors not to restrain themselves from coming to lecture the existing council.
Only current councilors. I've never said that.
Right.
And I have restrained myself, but this is an issue that's very near to my heart, which is flood control and the drainage system, particularly in my neighborhood. There's no surplus capacity. We've been lucky for the last couple of years, but in the 4 terms that I was on the council, we had every year a serious event in my in the Elm Street Brook drainage. And one of the best ways of mitigating that is the existing wetlands. As you know, over and over again, this is the sponge that absorbs surplus water, and sort of the best first-line defense. It doesn't need to be maintained, it just needs to be protected. And I also heard very clearly Mike Vito and other members of the Conservation Commission, and also Terry Anderson, that this is a compromise, that this is that the city has many different goals, and sometimes they conflict and need a balance. And I certainly agree with density in the urban residential areas. But I have 2 problems. One, wetlands are the most defensible open space, and open space is as important or more important in dense residential areas. So it really does need to be protected, and I trust the Conservation Commission to do that. I have not read the ordinance in detail. It was only on the easily available about a week ago. My real problems are kind of supplementary to that. That when the Conservation Commission or the ordinance says that the Conservation Commission can allow construction closer to the wetlands than we have in the past in the urban residential areas, but there must be extraordinary measures taken, or mitigation or replication, that this is an area that the city has had a lot of trouble. It starts with good intentions, but all of these need oversight and enforcement. We've been asking major projects to build retention ponds to deal with their own stormwater for more than 25 years. And we have only in the last year and a half begun to look at those retention ponds. When they fill up, they're no longer a mitigation. They don't work. So if you don't enforce and you don't have a mechanism to enforce regulations that you're passing, you're really stepping out on thin ice. And it goes beyond that. It's difficult. We're having difficulty in the courts prevailing. We issued, I think, a ticket fairly recently for a very clear violation, only to have the court toss it out. I think that that's probably ignorance, victimless crime, or whatever. So education on the city's part is we really need to be educating the courts and the public on the value of wetlands regulation and how immediately they really affect us. I know that it was, I know myself from living within 100 feet of a wetland, the temptation to dump stuff over the bank is that's what people do. I mean, they do that on all along Elm Street. You know, people would call me in the middle of the night, and there was water up to their knee in the middle of the, and then you'd come by 6 months later, and people would be wheelbarrowing their clippings and dumping it into the Elm Street brook or along the bank. The connection really has to be made. So partly education, probably the most effective way to make people understand that, yes, you live on high ground and the water that falls on is not your problem somehow, but it is your neighbor's problem, and we are in this together. So I guess my main point is that if you pass this regulation, that the council not forget the enforcement and the education side of this, that you must put in place a system that goes back and looks at these projects after they're done. And periodically, there needs to be an automatic review. Which leads to the final point, that the major storm system in the city is the city's, and it's broken. The storm drains that the city owns, that they put in 75, 100 years ago, that are written into people's deeds, that they have an easement to run drainage lines through, are broken, are gone away. The water dumps now into places that it was never meant to be dumped in. The city has no plan to fix its stormwater system, has no money, and it really is something that gets put off from year to year. But you continue to allow building, allow people to create more and more impervious soil upstream of, and the more that happens and the faster the water runs off, the more difficult and the more damaging the resulting storm water. So I believe in I think the aim of this ordinance. I really, I'm not sure that the city has a good record or a good plan for enforcement or education. Thanks.
Thank you, Al.
Alex.
Any questions, comments? Other members? Suzanne?
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Beck. I live at 51 Henshaw Avenue in Northampton, and I'm here representing the Chamber of Commerce in Northampton. I just wanted to give you an idea of kind of our process. As we've been made aware of the ordinance, the Chamber's Economic Development Committee generally reviews things of this nature, and they have been aware of it since in the spring, and we attended the hearing that was held. I think it was the April ConsCom meeting. We have not made any specific recommendation or position, understanding that there's a lot yet to discover about what the impacts of the ordinance are. So really all I want to do tonight is make some preliminary comments with the understanding that as we continue to work through the ordinance with members who have some expertise in this area, that we'll be back, probably better educated and certainly more knowledgeable. There are a couple of things. First of all, I wanted to compliment the Conservation Commission for its receptivity to the public comments and their willingness to make some changes to reflect those comments. We were very supportive of the reduction in standards, or whatever the right word is, for the business districts that Terry had advocated for, and it was, I think that was a good decision on the CONSCOM part, but it also was a very responsive one. The other piece that that stood out in terms of evolution of this draft is the adding the URB and URC residential areas as part of the where the encroachment zone is less than it is in outlying areas. I think there's a generally agreed upon or endorsed idea that infill development is a good strategy for Northampton, allowing growth but not losing our character in the process. So there are probably more questions that I have at this point than comments. One of them, the ordinance is written with the intent, as you heard, of from a conservation perspective. It also has a number of land use implications that, while they may not be the core intent, they are certainly an impact. And one of the issues that we certainly have faced in Northampton is the pressure on development and the balance between regulation and cost in terms of keeping, particularly in the residential areas, keeping housing costs under manageable, which they're not. 50% of the people that live in Northampton can't afford to buy, wouldn't be able to afford to buy a medium-priced home as things stand today. So it's a real issue.